Hello, everybody. You know what game I was not expecting to make a video on in 2017 is Rainbow Six Siege, because this game I recently got back into. It's a lot of fun. It's a very, very good game. It was a very good game at launch, but somehow this game, despite all odds, has continued to wow the industry in a way that we all didn't expect. Because as I said in the videos that I made when the game came out, if you guys have been around that long, if you're new, essentially what I said was this game is either going to die a horrible death or it's going to hang on for its life. And I didn't mean that the game was bad. The game is great, but I was expecting, in recent terms, as far as an analogy is concerned, I was expecting it to have the Titanfall 2 treatment, where people agree that it is a great game. It's just not, there's nobody playing it. That's what I was expecting the game to happen. I was expecting the player base to drop off drastically. And what I said was that there was going to be a Rainbow Six community for any Rainbow Six game that comes out. And that community is going to stick around and keep playing the game. But if you're a new player getting into the game, you're going to get so stomped because these people have been playing for years and you come in as fresh bait and you're just going to get destroyed over and over and over again. And then you would eventually leave and that community becomes smaller. So that's what I was expecting to happen. But what actually happened was that not only did people enjoy it at launch, but they evangelized the game and people came in who were new and continued to come in. And this is one of the only shooters in recent years that, other than Overwatch, I think those are the only two shooters. You can't really count Counter-Strike. So I think Overwatch and Rainbow Six are the only two shooters in recent years where they have continued to grow as the game progresses. Yeah, as in the player base is constantly expanding to a point where the devs, find it that they need to put content out. We even see that, which is a little weird. We even see it with Overwatch, right? They feel the need to continue to put content out because they have this huge player base that is continuing to play the game. With Rainbow Six, it was a different story. We knew that they were going to add some additional operators. There was a season pass for these operators, but you can unlock them through the game. We'll talk about that in a minute here. But the idea behind it was like, this looks like a typical Ubisoft game. It's going to be about a year lifespan, and then they'll come out with a second one and people will migrate to that. In fact, that's been the formula for shooters for years now. You go all the way back to Battlefield 1942. That's not the first example, but it is a good example because it has such a long tail on it. You look at 1942, that player base played the game until a new game came out. They all moved to whatever the new game was. It may have taken a while. They may not have all gone to Vietnam when it came out, or they may not have all gone to Battlefield 2, although most of them did. And then that moves on to Battlefield 3, so on and so forth, all the way down to Battlefield 1 now. And Battlefront could be a part of that succession rate too. But essentially what you're seeing is players will get into a game, they will play it, they will stop playing it because they know a new one will come out eventually. They'll jump into the new one, they'll play it, they'll stop play it because a new one will come out eventually, so on and so forth. It's a cycle. And this market has been very cyclical in the past. You even look at Call of Duty, great example. That is their market strategy. That's what they do. They put a game out every year because they know that the player base is going to migrate to it, because the players who don't are going to be stuck with a dying game, a game that does not have a player base anymore for multiplayer. But what we see with Siege is exactly the opposite. The game came out, was highly praised by the people playing it in a very Titanfall 2 manner. But what we see after that is that the people evangelize the game to the point where people are continuing to come in. Then Ubisoft, in a stroke of genius or complete luck, continue to support the game through esports, getting it onto Twitch a lot. And then past that, they are putting out new content for the game, which then makes the player base who came into the game fresh recently, with one of their updates, go, oh, they're actually supporting this game. And then the player base then feels happy to be continuing to play the game, and they continue to do so. So it's this interesting back and forth that has been happening that is it's a blip on the market. We need to figure out what exactly people are going to, and I will guarantee this, study this game thoroughly to see what happened? Why did Ubisoft continue to grow the game? I don't think it was really anything Ubisoft did, and I think that they could have tried and possibly failed, and they just organically let the game grow. I think that's very important. Another thing Ubisoft did that continued to grow the game was they didn't do their typical bullcrap where they just monetize the hell out of everything and you have to pay hand over fist in order to get expansions. I'm looking at you, Division, right? You have these expansion content that's coming out that's really good, such as Survival, that changes the game and makes it a lot better. Even Underground did that. But the problem is you have to pay for that stuff. And if you didn't get the season pass, then you're constantly having to shell out like these $20 little DLC packs. And it's just, it doesn't feel satisfying as a player. Whereas with Siege, what they did is you have a year one pass. The year one pass gave you access to all of the operators that would come out this year. You didn't have to buy them with what's called Renown, which is like the in-game currency that you get for doing anything in the game. That said, if you were using that Renown to buy operators, you couldn't necessarily use it to get all these customizations. So what you then have is you get this year one pass and you can unlock all these operators. But then you have the year two pack, and the year two pack does the same thing. It just adds more operators that you get for free. The year one pack is no longer available, to my understanding, and you can get these year two stuff. But again, all of these characters are available in the game by just playing the game and getting renown and unlocking them that way. You no longer, are necessarily spending all your renown on weapon upgrades or customizations for like different camos. What you're then seeing is that you're spending most of your renown, because it is kind of expensive, on new operators, which I'm fine with. It gives you a goal to work towards. And honestly, it makes sure that the players who are playing have a reason to keep playing, especially if they didn't pick up that year two pack. The people who did are then just customizing their stuff. Outside of that, they also have some DLC that just customizes the characters, adds new like helmets and masks to them, and different little doodads to hang off the guns, which is pretty cool, especially when you get like a replay. People can see that kind of stuff and see that you're very devoted to certain characters. And those packs are fairly inexpensive, and it's the way that Ubisoft has decided to monetize the game. But what we get out of this is that Ubisoft is being very smart, or in a way they're touching the game without touching the game. They're adding stuff for the players that are continuing playing. They're changing up the competitive meta, right? Because there is a competitive meta to this game, and there is an esports scene around this game. So in order to make sure that doesn't get stale, they're adding new characters and new ways to play and counter different ways of play, which is always very good for a competitive game. But we're seeing that they're also supporting the game through a means of being able to keep money going into it, right? That's an important part of a business strategy, is still getting money. And the DLC that they've put out isn't necessary for the enjoyment of the game. It's just there in order to enjoy the game more if you're already enjoying it. I find that fascinating. I find it interesting. And most of all, I'm excited to see where they go with this, because I think it's been enough time now that other companies have had a chance to study Siege, and other companies have had a chance to start game creation on a game like Siege. I think this is such a blip on the radar that people are going to try to replicate it. I wouldn't be surprised at E3 this year to see an early version of a game that is very similar. Whether or not it is the same, like concept-wise, or pretty greatly different, I don't think that that really matters. I think we're going to start to see Siege clones in some form or another, and I find that interesting, because I also think that Ubisoft is trying to find a way to replicate whatever they just did. They've had a bit more time to look at it than other companies, because they've had internal strategy meetings, and they've also had people telling them why they like the game. So they're one step ahead of the curve. So I think at E3 this year, or at one of the many game shows this year, we're going to see either a Siege clone from another company, or we're going to see a second game from Ubisoft. I wouldn't expect to see the second game until the latter half of the year because they still want to sell year one or year two passes. But I think that they'll show an early copy of a game that is pretty much the exact same game, just improved. And then that falls back into that business model being very cyclical where people will, jump from one game to another. But I also don't think that game will come out for a while. I think it will be a year or two before we see like an actually released version of a sequel to Siege from Ubisoft. It's so weird though to think about why this game worked and how people are still playing it. With that said, like I'm playing it, I'm enjoying it. It's only gotten better since launch, and there's not a lot of shooters that you can say do that. In fact, a lot of the time, again, they lose their player base and queue times get longer, and then you're no longer playing. This game is a bit slower. It's a bit methodical, and a good player can really carry a team, unlike in, say, Overwatch, where you need a couple of good players to really carry a team. If you're going up against a good team, one player isn't necessarily going to make a huge difference. You're going to need a couple players doing really well that are going to make a difference. In Siege, you can have one player just go through and destroy everybody because the time to kill is very low. And that means that the players that are playing the game constantly, have been playing the game constantly, their matchmaking rating is so much higher that you'll unlikely see them, but when you do, you'll know that you saw them because they will wreck you. And then the people that you're playing with that are fresh and times of Steam sales or times where the game is on a massive discount, then you'll see a huge influx of new players that you'll be able to play with. So if you haven't picked up the game, that's the time to do it, or around that time, within that month period, because then you're not going to be matched up against those really good uber like commando people. And instead you're going to be matched up against equal skilled players, which is important. And then if you have played the game, you do have it, then again, that's probably the best time to get involved in playing it again, is when those sales happen, such as, this recent winter sale where there are an influx of new players. You will then match up against whatever your MMR was before, but it will at least mean that if you drop that MMR rating, you'll start matching against people who are fairly new at the game. So, it works out in the end. Again, you'll get completely wrecked the first few games that you play, but when you get back into it and you start learning the game again, it will start feeling natural. But it's just, man, it is a good game. I don't know how they've done it. I'm not exactly sure. I can't put a finger on what keeps players around. And even I had left, but that was mostly due to a ton of other games coming out that year, including Overwatch. But since then, I have not really played too much Overwatch since it came out. And that surprised me, surprised a couple of my friends, and most importantly, shows that while that game is big, it's a massive behemoth, it doesn't have whatever is special about Siege. And people are going to need to take notice of that. But with all of that being said, we shall see you guys next time.